Hi there, I'm Dr. Jen Anderson from the postgraduate team at RMIT University's Study and Learning Centre. Welcome to the workshop on the traditional thesis structure. Even if you know you're not planning to write a traditional thesis, this is the form that underpins all other types, so there's bound to be something here for you. As you may know, a thesis is an extended written argument with supporting evidence. This may include publications. Whether you're conducting laboratory-based research, qualitative interview-based research, or archival research, you may be choosing to produce a PhD by thesis. In this workshop, we're going to explore the features of a thesis with particular reference to RMIT University. Once we've identified the essential elements, we'll explore the thesis structure from three perspectives: the thesis overview, the thesis or research story, and possible structural variations. Before you begin, bring your attention to your research project. Write half a page describing your research and identify your strengths in, say, reading or research design and process or writing, and list those areas of research skill or knowledge you'd like to extend or develop. Pause the video now so you can write. The word for thesis derives from the Greek. In modern usage, it has developed to mean fixing in place or a proposition. To have a thesis is to have a position, to put forward an argument. The idea of argument is not a fight, but a proposition that's based on evidence gathered from research. A thesis contains a single encompassing idea written as a persuasive argument. When we examine the 8 key competencies expected of our MIT University research graduates by submission, we can see how some of them relate directly to thesis structure. Pause the video and read them now. How can you develop an academic identity that underpins the acquisition of these skills and competencies? Well, competency is developed by applying recognisable social and material practices to study. That is, in your disciplinary field, how do people share knowledge and practices? What spaces and opportunities are available for discussing research? And what resources do they use to engage in this practice? How well do they need to be able to use these resources? Further skill is to be able to apply disciplinary modes of knowing and knowledge production. In your discipline, what does it mean to know something? What are the epistemological frames most often referenced in your discipline? This should relate to the methods of knowledge production that are privileged or favoured over others. What methods are preferred in your discipline and why? If you can answer these questions and understand them as essential to your research process, then you're developing an academic identity. Identity cannot be constructed in isolation. It requires regular and observant participation in writing, in professional gatherings, and in day-to-day work. We've identified 4 essential elements of a thesis. The first is independent and critical thinking. Your thesis shows that you're a member of an academic community, and in it you transfer knowledge using the writer's voice, which is scholarly and authoritative, guiding the reader to a clear understanding of your argument. What you discuss and how you discuss it reflects your researcher identity, and that identity should reveal a rigorous thinker who's willing not only to critique the work of others, but also challenge your own assumptions and beliefs. Can you entertain the idea that you might be wrong? It's really good if you can. Ask yourself, how do I know this to be true? The second element is that your thesis reveals your original contribution to research. This can be done in many ways, and 8 are presented here. There may be more, of course. Your supervisor should be the best guide to the nature and importance of the contribution you're making. So, of these 8, there's probably many, many more than these 8. But as I mention them, ask yourself, do any of these relate to my research? Carry out innovative empirical research. Synthesize ideas in a fresh way. Reinterpret previously known material from a different perspective or theoretical frame. Apply research done elsewhere to a local situation. Apply an existing technique to a new area. Take a fresh perspective on existing research and produce new evidence. Use an approach from another discipline, or investigate a new area in your discipline. There are so many ways to be creative and original, and you may be using more than one. Why do you need to identify the areas of your creative input? Well, because all theses have storylines, and the creative element is a major part of your storyline. It's especially important in your thesis discussion and conclusion. A third essential element is to make sure your thesis identifies a clear and well-defined research scope. At the beginning of your research, it's easy to overestimate the scope, to think you'll have infinite time and other resources to spend, and that every idea you have and every research paper you read must be included. Managing scope is one of the most difficult things to do. What stays in? What gets cut? How can I justify my choices? Try to establish the scope as early as you can and keep it in mind as you undertake your research. Save yourself the pain of cutting 50,000 words at the end. The fourth essential element is to have a clear picture about your audience. In the first year or two of our candidature, we tend to think our scholarly audience of examiners and supervisors knows so much more than we do, so we don't want to bore them with the details of our research. But that's what they're looking for, your understanding of the links between ideas, your explanation for phenomena, and so on. Boyer argues that the work of the scholar is only as consequential as its ability to be understood. First of all, we need to recognise that our audience is in our discipline and will be looking for the discourse features that distinguish this discipline from others. One of the most important discourse features is the structure. And now we're going to focus on format and structure. An overview of the thesis will show that it is divided into 3 basic sections. The front sections of the thesis include the title page, the declaration that this is your work and no one else's, acknowledgement of others who have supported you, the table of contents, and a list of figures or tables or images as relevant, and a summary or abstract. The main text contains the thesis chapters from introduction to conclusion, and the end sections include the reference list, or perhaps a bibliography, and appendices, which might include tables of research results, key archival material, or a glossary of terms. If we look at the structure of the main section, it's divided into 3 levels: macro, chapter headings and subheadings; middle, the paragraphs; and micro, sentences and words. We should be able to identify the conceptual framework of the thesis by reading the headings, subheadings, and topic sentences of the paragraphs. That is, we should be able to understand the story of the research from these 3 parts. The structure carries the story. The structure becomes clearer as you write your way into the thesis. Research by Peggy Nightingale on what examiners look for in a thesis found that the first thing they look at, after checking to see if their name is in the bibliography, is to see what your aims are, that is, the research questions in the introduction, and then to see what your claims are, the answers to your research questions that they'll find in the conclusion. They want them to be aligned. They don't want to search to find them or infer them. They want them explicitly stated. In a traditional thesis, there are 7 main sections. What are the key questions you should answer in each section? Well, the first likely question to be answered in the introduction is, what's the research about and why am I doing it? Notice that that's in the present tense. Next, the literature review answers the questions, what's already known about this topic? The research design and methodology section answers the question, how did I go about my research? What did I do? The results of implementing the methods answers the question, so what did I find? What were the results? The discussion section responds to the question, what do my results actually mean in terms of the research question and the previous research? And the conclusion answers the question, what is the significance of these results and what are the key contributions I've made to knowledge? These claims parallel the aims in the introduction. And finally, recommendations, often made in the conclusion, will answer the question, so what happens next? What future research is recommended? But does a traditional thesis have to be structured in this way? No, it doesn't. You don't have to follow the exact order, but you do need a structure in which your claims match your aims and you have a clear, logical storyline. The storyline in skeleton form goes like this. What's already known about an issue determines your research question or problem. The research question or problem determines your methodology. Your methodology will point to the research methods and or techniques you use. And the methods produce results. The results then determine what you can discuss. And your discussion determines your conclusion, which is also linked back to your introduction and your recommendations. It's a great story, isn't it? In a traditional thesis, there are a number of possible variations, some of which are determined by your discipline. For example, in engineering, the literature review, which tends to be relatively short, can become a subheading in the introduction. Have a think. What variations can you make? Note that the introduction and the conclusion are fixed sections. Pause the video now while you have a think about it. Well, here are a few other variations. As mentioned, the introduction may include the literature review. The methodology section may be part of the literature review. Methodology and results may be combined, or else the results and the discussion may be combined. And finally, the conclusion and recommendations may be combined. Now it's time for you to make use of the structural elements discussed in this workshop and identify them in other theses. Download the PDF document beside the link to this workshop. Look at each of the thesis contents pages and identify the key thesis elements. Can you see any variations? Why do you think they chose to vary the basic format? Can you understand the research story when you read the content page? This is our aim, to create a clear structure reflected in a clear set of headings and subheadings. And as you read, ask yourself, what research structure will I use? But before you go, a few more words of advice to do before you leave us. The thesis is a complex document, but it should be thought of as building a simple cottage rather than a large mansion. The number of rooms are limited, and they're joined together in clearly defined ways. Your thesis is the evidence of work from a novice researcher, and once it's completed, you have the possibility of extending those skills for many years to come. Perhaps a mansion may be in your career purview. Here are some references and some recommended readings. And finally, I like this quote because it reminds us that the thesis structure and the ways in which we formulate knowledge are to significant degrees, though not absolutely, determined by the culture of our societies and our academic disciplines. You may choose to resist this display of power, but ask yourself, does my thesis warrant a new discourse and a new structure? Can I justify it? Sometimes the traditional structure works the best for our purposes. Cheers.